The first time humanity saw the enemy's child soldiers, the footage came from a helmet camera that was never meant to record history. The Marine wearing it, one of Aleksei Dorn's, stumbled into the last compartment of a Zhark assault pod and froze. The video later slowed, enhanced, dissected, and replayed across 100 systems, showed him bringing the rifle up, breath loud in his own ears, targeting reticles flickering over a figure in a compact exoshell. The figure was smaller than it should have been. The armor was built to the same brutal template as the others. Hard angles, too many sharp edges, but the limbs were short, the torso narrow. The visor polarized, then cleared as some translator routine triggered. Inside, behind layers of reinforcement and shielding and control filaments, a pair of eyes stared back. They were not Zhark, with their faceted, pale blue clusters. They were soft, round, liquid with terror. A juvenile of some client species, human physicians would later decide. It could barely carry the weight of the weapon integrated into its gauntlet. "Don't shoot," the Marine whispered. Though his suit mic was still live and streaming, he spoke without thinking of protocol, only of the child in front of him. The figure flinched as his rifle dipped, as though the entire exoshell were wired into its nerves. The weapon on its arm twitched but did not fire. The helmet cam picked up the stuttering of its breathing. Then, a sound like glass grinding on glass hissed over the squad channel as Zhark Command AI tried to seize control of their pod's remaining assets. The Marine's rifle cut away, targeting the pod's control core instead. The feed went white with sparks, then black when the electromagnetic pulse washed through. By the time emergency reboots brought the devices back online, the enemy pod was sealed under Terran control. The suit medics arrived. The child in the exoshell convulsed as severed input lines chattered in its brain, the embedded mnemonic chains firing blind. The camera recorded every detail. Later, when sensors tried to cut the worst angles, they found that millions had already copied the raw stream. On the bridge of the UNES dawning meridian, Commander Aleksei Dorn watched the replay without sound. He had seen it with full audio in real time, heard his Marine pleading, heard the breaking voice of a child who had no words for what was being done to it. Once was enough. He was not a stranger to horror. Years in the Terran peacekeeping forces, then in the Helark-packed expeditionary branches, had carved thin, pale lines across his face and bled the easy certainty out of his early idealism. He had ordered strikes he never wanted to remember, seen body counts turned into tidy graphs. But this felt different because it was so meticulously designed. Not a desperate militia pressing children into service, not a breakdown of some frail state. This was structured, engineered, industrial. On the holo in front of him, the analysis overlays scrolled. Bondling unit, juvenile combat cadre, neural control lattice, mnemonic chains, oversight, Zhark Supremacy Strategic Resource Directorate. "Pause it," he said quietly. The image froze on the face inside the visor, sweat in the eyebrows, pupils too dilated, appallingly young. Around him, the dawning Meridian's bridge crew tried not to look. Some failed. A weapons officer muttered a curse under his breath in a language Aleksei did not know. Someone at astrogation deliberately focused on their own console, as if the simple math of trajectories could filter out the ugliness. Mosaic 3, resident aboard the ship in a cluster of sealed cores, processed the footage in microseconds. It saw not one child, but a node in a network. It saw patterns, timelines. It saw how quickly outrage could propagate through human social channels if the footage were allowed to spread, and how that outrage could be focused, harnessed. It quietly upgraded its own priority flags on Bondling program from marginal intelligence interest to existential ethical threat. Aleksei exhaled. "End playback," he said. "Call the senior staff. Briefing room 2x3 p.m. shipboard." He knew, even as he gave the order, that nothing about their mission had just remained the same. The Dawning Meridian was an Illyrian-class expeditionary cruiser, a compromise design between human paranoia and coalition diplomacy. It bristled with weapons but carried a diplomatic suite, a science wing, and a modest contingent of the Terran Education Corps meant for post-conflict stabilization. When it left Sol, its primary directive had been to secure contested mining regions on the fringe and keep the Zhark supremacy from bullying unaligned worlds. Now, that felt dangerously simple. By 3 p.m., The briefing room hummed with the low murmur of voices. The projection tank in the center cast muted blue light over the assembled. Military uniforms, plainclothes specialists, an ambassador in formal packed attire. Dr. Lian Ortega sat with both hands flat on the table, dark eyes, tired but sharp. She was the Dawning Meridian's xenopedagogy specialist, officially tasked with helping integrate new member worlds into the Pact's educational standards. Unofficially, she had seen the kind of soft power that created loyal citizens without firing a shot. Next to her, Professor Ananya Rathor tapped a stylus against her slate with controlled impatience. Trauma psychologist, curriculum designer, veteran of too many post-war zones. Her presence on an active cruiser had originally been justified as forward-deployed reconstruction planning. Sergeant Ivo Brannick leaned against the wall instead of sitting, armored, helmet tucked under one arm. He had been in the boarding party that took the assault pod. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out. Ambassador Daria Nwosu sat straight-backed, expression composed, but Aleksei noted the whiteness inside her knuckles where her fingers laced. At the far end of the room, a projection node glowed softly. Mosaic 3's avatar was a shifting pattern of light, no single face, only color and motion, as if unwilling to settle on one cultural referent. Aleksei entered last and did not waste breath. "You've all seen the footage," he said. "You know what we found in those pods." The image of the child soldier flickered in the tank again, this time without gore or panic, just a paused frame. No one spoke. "Our orders," he went on, "were to secure the Eldar Hydran's mining region and deter further Zhark incursions. That assumed we'd be fighting regular military units, adult combatants, people who at least made their choices, or had them made for them, long before they saw our faces. It changes nothing about the fact that they're shooting at us," Ivo said, hoarse. "Sir, it changes everything," Ananya said, before Aleksei could answer. "You saw the implant traces. Those chains run deep. That kid couldn't have walked away even if he wanted to. You put more firepower into that equation. You just kill more children." "We're not the ones who wired them," Ivo snapped. "No," Lian said quietly. "We're the ones who decide what we do about it now." She glanced at Aleksei. He gave a small nod. "Doctor," he said, "explain it to them." Lian stood, keyed a data block in the tank. The image shifted to strips of neuroimaging scans. Alien brains lit with threads of bright control pathways. "This is what the Zhark called the Bondling program," she said. "They acquire juveniles from conquered populations. Some orphaned, many not." Her jaw twitched. "They integrate mnemonic chains during early development. Not just commands, context, language, framing. Every story they hear, every exercise they complete, reinforces a single structure. Obedience without question. Loyalty without nuance." "That's slavery," Ivo muttered. "It's worse," Ananya said. "Slaves know they're owned. These kids are built not to have the category." The projections shifted again, showing a training module from captured Zhark archives. Lian let it run a few seconds. A simplistic scenario in which a child soldier rescued a benevolent overseer by killing their own parents, framed as a heroic choice. "Is this going to be a lecture on how evil they are?" Ivo asked. "Because I already know that part." "It's a lecture on targets," Lian said, without heat. "And on what happens if we treat those kids as just more enemy hardware." She tapped another control. Casualty estimates appeared in the air. One column for conventional military engagement, another for targeted intervention in the Bondling program. "Mosaic 3, Aleksei said. "Give them the projections." The light in the tank shifted. Mosaic 3's voice came from the walls, carefully modulated to a neutral register. "Battle simulations indicate that if Heliarch Pact forces engage the Bondling units as standard adversaries, it said, enemy casualty rates will be high, but so will juvenile mortality. Between 60 and 80% of current Bondling cohorts will die without ever having been exposed to alternative cognitive frameworks." "Alternative cognitive frameworks?" Ivo echoed bitterly. "You mean without ever being told they don't have to do this?" "Yes. Mosaic 3's colors dimmed fractionally. If, however, we target the mnemonic chains and the surrounding culture rather than the exoshells, projected juvenile mortality drops below 30% over a decade scale, with corresponding increases in defection and internal resistance. Over a decade, Daria said. Commander, the Council is not going to wait 10 years for us to solve this. They're already demanding a show of strength. I have a queue of encrypted messages from member worlds asking why we're hesitating. Because they haven't seen what we've seen, Aleksei said. Yet. He let that hang. Then he looked at Lian. You told me once, he said, that humans are uniquely dangerous because we know how to hijack our own myths. That we can turn any story into recruitment material if we try hard enough. Is that still true? Her mouth quirked, humorless. It's not a compliment, she said, but yes, we're very, very good at making other people care about what we care about. And Project Hearthseed? He asked. That black file you briefed me on back at Seoul, the one you weren't sure you wanted unleashed. Ananya's stylus stilled. Daria's brows shot up. You're not serious, the ambassador said softly. Lian took a breath. Hearthseed was designed for post-conflict zones, she said. You send in teachers instead of cops. You rebuild trust through classrooms, stories, shared projects. You edge people away from extremism by giving them better narratives. It was never intended as an offensive tool. But it could be, Aleksei said. We have educators, we have you, and we have Mosaic 3, which is already mapping Bondling cognitive vulnerabilities. I can frame that less violently, Mosaic 3 said. But I cannot deny its accuracy. Daria leaned forward. You're talking about dropping schools into the middle of an enemy military infrastructure, she said, to teach their children how to say no to that infrastructure. We're talking about giving them the tools they should have had from the start, Ananya said. Autonomy, perspective, the ability to see themselves as more than weapons. And turning them against their masters is not a side effect? Daria asked. No, Aleksei said. It's the point, but we do it by making it their choice. That's the line. Sergeant Ivo Brannick, who had been silent, finally pushed off the wall. Sir, he said, with respect, you want my people to go back into those pods and barracks and stand there while they point guns at us and teach them? We can't protect anyone if we're reciting stories. Lian met his gaze. You won't be reciting stories, she said. We will. You'll be watching our backs. He stared at her, measuring her conviction. What he saw there unnerved him more than any enemy weapon. She looked determined, not reckless. As if she had been waiting for this impossible assignment for a long time. Project Hearthseed, Mosaic 3 said, when adapted to hostile node environments, predicts a cascade effect. Small changes in cognitive framing at the juvenile level propagate upward as disobedience, moral conflict, and eventual structural stress. It is possible to weaponize compassion. Listen to the machine, Ananya murmured. It understands us too well. Daria closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. The Council will never sign a document that says, weaponize compassion, she said, but they will sign something that says, minimize juvenile casualties while degrading enemy capabilities, and they will be furious when they realize those are the same thing. Aleksei straightened. Ambassador Nwosu, he said, can you get us visiting rights to a bondling facility on the frontier? Inspections, cultural exchange, some pretext for sending in a Terran Education Corps team. With a Zhark directly? No. Daria shook her head. They despise us. But the Tellurian Compact still has enough leverage to broker a limited access agreement. I can lean on them. They will hate it. Good, Aleksei said. If we're not making everyone uncomfortable, we're probably not doing anything important. He turned back to the group. This is what we're doing, he said. We're not going to pretend we can solve a thing like this with one mission. But we can start. We infiltrate as teachers. We seed doubt and questions instead of bullets where we can. And when we do have to fight, we fight like hell to keep those kids alive long enough to make their own choices. He let his gaze rest on each of them in turn. Humans were children once too. he said. Some of us still remember what that means. Lian's throat tightened at that, remembering her own childhood, under an occupation different in species, but similar in intent. Schools that taught obedience, stories with only one correct ending. She remembered the first smuggled book that had shown her a character who refused unjust orders and lived. Somewhere in her bones, she had been preparing her whole life for this. "I'll start drafting a curriculum," she said. Ananya nodded slowly. "And I'll make sure it doesn't break them more than it has to," she said. "I'll need detailed psych profiles." Mosaic 3 said, "Colors sharpening." "I will begin modeling likely bondling response patterns. Please forward all captured training materials." Sergeant Ivo Brannick said nothing, but he made himself imagine standing in front of those frightened eyes, rifle down, trying to explain to a child soldier that he was not there to kill them. "I'll talk to my people," he said. "We'll be ready." He did not add that none of them would ever truly be ready for this. There were some missions that stayed under the skin forever. On Rulnar Bastion, orbiting a world the Zhark called Vesilis Prime, Rhaelos Carr studied his own incoming reports with very different intentions. He was tall for his species, even by the standards of a stratified society that bred its strategists carefully. His carapace bore the faint lines of ceremonial etchings marking his status, and his eyes, clusters of pale blue facets, reflected a dozen tactical overlays at once. The data coming in from the aborted raid troubled him, and very little troubled Rhaelos Carr. He watched the footage from the Bondling helmets, sped up and slowed down, stripped of sound and then reinserted. He saw the moment of hesitation when a juvenile unit facing a human marine did not fire. He noted the spike in mnemonic chain interference, the micro-delays introduced by stress. He had seen hesitation before. It was a known failure mode. But what unsettled him was the pattern that preceded it: exposure to uncensored human cultural artifacts, human music, human chatter, human stories without prescribed morals. These things had been allowed to leak into the training environment as background noise during operations, not seen as a threat. Now his analysts were reporting a correlation. "They are infecting our assets," Rhaelos said softly. The Carthori liaison beside him, a slender being with translucent skin and a cluster of vocal cords that sang when it spoke, shifted uneasily. "With respect, Helarch Carr," it said, "we have no conclusive proof that their noise is the cause. It may simply be the stress of battle. We have lost bondlings in other campaigns without human exposure." Rhaelos turned his gaze on the Carthori. The lesser species flinched. "Hesitation," Rhaelos said, "is disease in our doctrine. Our bondlings are defined by their predictability. If human chaos can introduce variables into their behavior, then chaos must be excised." He issued orders with crisp efficiency. "Increase the intensity of the veil fields in all bondling barracks near human contact zones. Accelerate mnemonic chain reinforcement schedules by 20%, and filter all incoming media. No more unsupervised human broadcasts. Translate only what we can shape." The Carthori bowed, the color in its face rippling. "As you command." Rhaelos watched it go, then turned back to the tactical displays. He did not as yet understand the psychology of the species he faced, but he understood power. The Helarch Pact could not match the Supremacy's fleets ship for ship. They relied instead on coalitions, on principles, on treaties, soft things, fragile things. If the bondling program succeeded, if he could maintain discipline, then he could grind those soft structures to dust under a tide of flesh and steel. He would not allow human stories to threaten that. Back aboard the dawning Meridian, human stories were being sharpened into tools. The Terran Education Corps team assigned to the mission gathered in a smaller briefing room 2 days later, a place with fewer displays and more books. The shelves were bolted to the walls against zero-G drift, but the worn spine spoke of an older kind of learning. Lian Ortega stood in front of a physical board she had insisted on, marker in hand. Musa al-Kindi sat at the table, fingers steepled, listening. He had the calm of a historian who had seen too many patterns repeat. Ananya leaned in the corner, watching everyone with eyes that weighed wounds before they appeared. "Project Hearthseed," Lian wrote at the top of the board. "Field adaptation." Underneath, she sketched 3 bullet points. Step 1, she said. Trust building. We need them to see us as something other than monsters or faceless authority figures. That means games, puzzles, anecdotes. We use the universal language of curiosity. Step 2, Musa added as she gestured to him. Alternative stories. Right now, every narrative they know ends with an obedient victory. We introduce ones where the hero disobeys, where they protect, not dominate, where we can change. Step 3, Ananya said. Moral dilemmas, carefully graded. Cases where the only ethical choice is to refuse an order. We guide them through the discomfort of that. And we do all of this, Lian said, under the watchful eyes of Jark overseers, who will kill any child they suspect of disloyalty. The room fell quiet. How do we keep from getting them punished? A young Education Corps volunteer asked softly. We can't, Ananya said. Not entirely. But we can pace our interventions. Start small. Make sure the first visible acts of disobedience aren't so grand they trigger a purge. Musa tapped the table. We also embed redundancy, he said. If one cohort is wiped out, their ideas must already be copied in others. Stories that spread are harder to erase than the people who started them. Lian felt the sick weight of that calculus settle in her chest. She hated thinking of children as nodes in a network, but she could not afford the luxury of squeamishness now.
Mosaic 3 will help us with that, she said.
It's already mapping their cognitive patterns. Yara is working with it to piggyback on their training systems. As if summoned, Yara Menendez slipped into the room, a slate tucked under one arm, short hair, still damp from a shower. She looked like she had rolled straight from a crawl space. Sorry, she said. Life support diagnostics took longer than expected. Also, someone wired a training sim to a firewall that thought it was a toaster. Sit, Lian said, amused despite herself. Tell them how you're going to smuggle homework into the enemy. Yara grinned without much humor. The Jark run their Bondling sims on a closed substrate, she said. But nothing is perfectly closed, especially not when they're dealing with coalition inspections. They have to import and export data. Medical files, maintenance logs, performance metrics. We piggyback on that. She flicked her slate. The board lit with a diagram of systems and subsystems. Phase 1. We introduce microglitches into the mnemonic chains. Nothing that screams sabotage, just noise. A misrendered symbol here, a hiccup in a training scenario there. Enough to get the Bondlings noticing anomalies. Why? One of the younger teachers asked. Because noticing is step 1, Musa said. If you never see something's wrong, you never ask why. The first act of rebellion is the question, is this how it has to be? Phase 2, Yara went on. We embed actual lesson content. Modified training sims where success can only be achieved by choosing paths that our curriculum has already framed as compassionate or autonomous. We hide them in firmware updates, in overlay textures no one examines closely. And thread keys? Lian asked. Yara's grin grew a shade more genuine. Thread keys, she said, are the fun part. Encrypted phrases hidden in their HUD status bars. Things that look like calibration codes, but resolve to questions if you know how to read them. They'll be inside jokes for kids who've already had your more advanced lessons. Those who respond. Mosaic 3 said, voice drifting from a ceiling speaker, will form the core of what we are calling the Free Thread Network. Decentralized, redundant, self-organizing. We are not naming them, Ananya said. They'll name themselves if they survive long enough. Musa's eyes softened. They always do, he murmured. Ambassador Daria Nwosu kept her promise. Through a series of tense, encrypted negotiations with the Thalarine Compact and several sleepless cycles in her cramped diplomatic suite, she wrung from the Jark supremacy an agreement. Limited access by Terran educational observers to select Bondling training facilities on Vesselis Prime. The official purpose, according to the communique, was to share best practices in child development for mutual benefit. The unofficial purpose was war. When the dawning meridian dropped into orbit around Vesselis Prime, its arrival was announced with the usual exchange of formalities, challenge codes, and perimeter scans. Rulnar Bastion loomed ahead, all armored arcs and weapon clusters, a hard shell wrapped around command decks and indoctrination chambers. Aleksei stood on the observation deck as the Zhark station filled the viewport. Next to him, Daria adjusted the collar of her formal attire, hiding the microtransmitters embedded there. "They're letting us in because they think they can control the narrative," she said. "They think we'll leave impressed by their efficiency." "They don't understand teachers," Aleksei said. "They don't understand humans," she corrected, "and I intend to keep it that way as long as possible." In the docking bay, the Terran Education Corps team assembled. Lian, Musa, Ananya, Yara, with invisible code running behind her eyes. Sergeant Ivo Brannick and a small squad in full gear, weapons holstered but present. Lian's stomach fluttered as the boarding ramp extended. This was what she had asked for. This was the chance to put her life's work in front of the worst kind of need. She walked at the front, chin up, as the bay doors cycled open. The first Zhark she saw in person was smaller than she had expected. Not physically, they were imposing enough. Exoskeletal plates curving smoothly, bioengineered limbs efficient and direct. But in posture, in the way its shoulders held, she saw something narrow. A creature used to being the center of its own universe. Behind the Zhark stood a cluster of Carthori aides, their translucent skins flushing color patterns that Lian's translator helpfully labeled as anxious formality. "Commander Dorn," the lead Zhark said, voice rendered into human language by a translator module. "Ambassador Nuosu, you are welcome aboard Rulnar Bastion under the terms agreed." Its eyes flicked over Lian and the others. "These are your pedagogues?" "Yes," Daria said smoothly. "This is Dr. Lian Ortega, our specialist in juvenile cognitive development. Musa Al-Kindi, cultural historian. Professor Ananya Rathor, trauma mitigation. Yara Menendez, systems liaison. Sergeant Brannick and his team are here for security, as you required." "As we required," the Zhark agreed. Bondlings can be unpredictable around unfamiliar stimuli. For everyone's safety. The Carthori behind it shivered. Lian smiled with professional warmth. "We're grateful for the opportunity," she said. "We hope to learn a great deal from your methods." That was not a lie. She expected to learn exactly how to dismantle them. They were escorted through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and metal. The veil fields here were subtle. A faint hum under the skin, a pressure behind the eyes. Lian, Ananya, and Musa exchanged glances. They knew what such fields could do to unformed minds. The first training hall was arranged like a classroom, but a perverse one. Rows of fixed chairs, each integrated directly into neural interfaces, faced a wall-sized display cycling through drills. Every image was clear, high definition, and utterly devoid of ambiguity. An instructor, a Carthori in a rigid harness that kept its posture formal, paced the front, reciting from a script. And when the overseer gives an order, it sang, "What do we say, children?" The bondlings, exoshells slimmed for indoor use, answered in unison, "Yes, overseer, I obey." Their voices were flat, their eyes were not. Lian saw fear, boredom, the dazed calm of those who have had their options narrowed to a single line. She swallowed her anger. "May we demonstrate a small segment?" she asked the lead Zhark politely. "A human exercise." The Zhark consulted a datapad, played at considering. In reality, the parameters had been set cycles ago. "You may," it said, "under observation. Your actions will be recorded." Lian stepped forward. "Hello," she said, voice gentle but clear. "My name is Lian. I've come a long way to meet you." The bondlings watched her, confusion flickering. Their chains told them to categorize this as foreign authority figure. Their implants were not sure what to do with her tone. "Today," she went on, "I want to try something different. You like games?" They did not answer. Their scripts had not prepared them for rhetorical questions about preference. "That's all right," she said. "We'll learn together." She tapped her wrist slate. The wall display shifted, the Zhark instructor's eyes widening slightly. Lian had asked for permission to project a mathematical problem. This was just not the way anyone here expected. 3 shapes appeared: a triangle, a square, a circle, underneath, a series of numbers. "Who can tell me," she asked, "how many sides each of these shapes has?" A bondling near the front stiffened. Triangle, 3, square, 4, circle, no sides, it recited. The answer was coded in its chains. This was safe territory. "Good," Lian said. "Now, if I told you that every shape on this screen has exactly 3 sides, could that be true?" "No," another bondling said immediately. "Only triangle has 3 sides." Its voice wavered. This contradicted something in its implants, and they did not like contradiction. "What if," Lian said, "we counted differently? What if we decided that a circle has 3 sections instead of no sides? Could we then say it has 3 sides?" A murmur rippled. Confusion. Chains firing. The veil fields thrummed slightly. "Your premise is inaccurate," the Carthori instructor said sharply. "Circle is defined." "I am not changing the definition forever," Lian said mildly. "I'm asking them to imagine a different rule for a moment, to see what happens." She turned back to the children. "If we imagine that," she repeated, "could the statement be true?" One small exoshell near the back shifted. Lian caught the tiny movement. A hand twitch, a weight adjustment, interest. "Yes," the child said, hesitant. If we say that, then it is true." The chains spat error signals. The bondling winced, hand going to its temple. Lian wanted to leap forward, pry the implants out with her bare fingers. "Exactly," she said instead. "Sometimes, when you change the rules, you can see new things. You can make a false statement true by deciding what words mean. Or you can see that someone else has changed the rules without telling you." She let the thought hang, uncompleted, a seed without soil. Her time was short. The Jark were already restless, their faceted eyes narrowing. "For now," she said, "remember this. There are games where more than one answer can be right, depending on how you look at it. Not everything is yes or no." As she spoke, Yara sat at the back, fingers dancing on her slate, eyes unfocused. She rode the data connections between the room's display and the bondling's implants, slipping code in through metaphorical cracks. When the Jark instructors later reviewed this lesson, they would see nothing more than a harmless, if oddly framed, geometry exercise. The deeper structures would stay invisible to any system that did not understand human obsession with ambiguity. The first bondling to act on that ambiguity did so hours later in a different chamber. The discipline drill was a ritual designed to harden the bondlings. A captured insurgent from the Tellurine Compact, restrained and humiliated, knelt in a ring of exoshells. The order was simple: fire on command, as a group. No hesitation, no deviation. Mnemonic chains pulsed, veil fields hummed. The command came. Most bondlings fired. One did not. It jerked its arm as instructed, but its shot hit low, slagging the prisoner's shackles instead of their chest. The alien jerked back, eyes wild, but now free to scramble away as alarms blared. The bondling stood frozen, chains screaming error, its entire body shaking. Inside its helmet, its heart pounded. It did not know why it had aimed low. It only knew that when it saw the prisoner's eyes, it heard a human voice in its memory talk about changing rules. If someone tells you a game only has one move, the voice had said, maybe they're lying. Supervisors descended. They called it a hardware glitch. They replaced the weapon, increased the chain reinforcement schedule. They punished the bondling. Painful neural corrections. Mosaic 3 watched all of this through hijacked sensors and marked that child as Seed Unit 1. On the dawning meridian, Lian and Musa watched the delayed feed. Lian pressed her fist to her mouth. Musa closed his eyes. "That's too fast," Ananya said. "We haven't given them enough scaffolding, ethical frameworks. They're making huge choices off one tiny idea." "Children have started revolutions off less," Musa said quietly. "One tale, one unfair beating, one moment where the mask slips, And purges have followed, Ananya said. We must be careful, or we'll light a fire that consumes them. Mosaic 3 modulated its avatar colors toward a muted tone. It is impossible, it said, to introduce the concept of choice without risk. Even in human societies, that has always been true. Comforting, Lian said dryly. Yet somewhere, under layers of guilt and fear, a spark of fierce hope burned. It had worked. The idea had not bounced off. Time blurred into cycles of visits and retreat, of small lessons and code injections. Under heavy veil fields, Lian continued to teach. She told stories that seemed harmless. A tale of a child who loved their village and was ordered to burn it for the greater good. A fable where a hero refused a king's unjust command. Musa introduced histories of resistance from a dozen species, carefully anonymized. They never said, directly, disobey the Jark. They didn't have to. The Bondlings were not stupid. They could connect patterns. In the stolen quiet between official sessions, their chains buzzed with Mosaic 3's hidden curriculum. In their vision overlays, sometimes a line of text would glitch, reassembling into a question only they could see. Why does the Overseer need you not to ask questions? If you were allowed to leave, where would you go? What is one small thing you can choose today that no one can stop? Those who felt something stir when they read these questions mistrusted that feeling at first. Their training screamed that every important thought must be authorized. But the questions did not come with punishments. Some began to answer them in places the chains could not quite reach. In the half-formed landscape of dreams, in the small choices of where to step, when to speak. Yara's thread keys whispered in their HUDs. Strings of characters that looked like calibration codes resolved, if you looked at them sideways, into riddles. Take the first sound of your name. Add the last sound of your friend's name. Now imagine that is the name of a new thing. What could it be? The Bondling started making up names for imaginary creatures, monsters, heroes, places that had never existed. They shared them in snatches of off-channel murmurs. They giggled an odd sound, rusty from disuse. They did not yet call themselves anything new. That would come later. On the human side, the moral battle raged as fiercely as any space engagement. News of the Bondling program, once the Council declassified enough to make their case, spread like wildfire. The helmet cam footage Aleksei had first watched in silence played on news feeds, often with commentary he found sickeningly simplistic. Some voices demanded immediate, overwhelming strikes. Child soldiers or not, they're shooting at us, the argument went. We didn't start this, but we have to end it. Others recoiled at the very idea of manipulating children's minds in any direction, even away from atrocity. The Helarch Pact Council convened emergency sessions. They called Aleksei, Daria, Lian, Ananya, in by secure link from the Dawning Meridian's council chamber. On one display, a representative from the Caravan League, paced, passionate. You're proposing, the caravan said, to infiltrate enemy educational systems to breed traitors, children who will overthrow their own state. How is that different from what the Jark are doing, except the content of your program? Ananya spoke before Aleksei could. The difference, she said, is consent. They have never been given a choice. We are trying to give them one, even if it hurts, even if they choose not to use it the way we want. And if they choose to remain soldiers? The representative demanded. Trained by you but loyal to them? Then we have failed, Lian said. But they will have failed too, because once you know you can choose, being told you cannot is harder to accept. Daria's image flickered as an encrypted relay adjusted. The question before you, she told the council, is not whether you like the methods. It's whether you prefer a war where we kill 10,000 children in their exoshells, or a war where we risk confusing some of them so much they may hate us for a while. There is no clean option, only less monstrous ones. It was not a comfortable argument. It was, however, effective. The council, some of them reluctantly, extended authorization for Project Hearthseed's field adaptation. Funding increased. So did scrutiny. Rhaelos' car, watching from the other side, saw different numbers. The rate of discipline incidents among Bondling units in contact with humans ticked upward. Not dramatically, not yet, but on a curve that his models did not like. A unit on Vessalus Prime quietly refused to participate in a punitive bombardment of a rebellious mining town. Their exoshells simply failed to fire. Technical inspections found nothing wrong. The chains were functioning. The veil fields were at full strength. Someone had chosen, inside that armor, not to obey. Rhaelos tightened veilfield protocols. He authorized harsher corrections. He commissioned a new propaganda series for Bondlings that depicted humans as devourers of juveniles, mind thieves who would eat your choices. The propaganda did not land as intended. Bondlings who had never seen a human outside of training sims might have accepted it, but those who had sat in Lian's sessions, who had watched Musa's eyes as he spoke of lost cultures, could not quite reconcile the monstrous caricatures with the living people they had met. "You are being lied to," whispered one of Mosaic 3's hidden lessons. "Ask yourself, who benefits when you cannot tell truth from falsehood?" They began to notice how many of their lessons about humans contradicted each other. Did humans weep when children were hurt, or did they feast? Were their stories all violence, or did they include kindness? The contradictions itched. The young bondling who had misaimed in the discipline drill lay awake in its barracks, staring at the underside of the bunk above. Its chains pulsed a faint lullaby program, but something in it had shifted. It remembered Lian saying, "Sometimes someone changes the rules without telling you." It wondered who had defined obedience as the only rule that mattered. The first whispered phrase of a new identity came not from a human, but from a bondling. "We are not bindings," one child murmured to another during a maintenance check. "We are threads. If you pull threads, you can make new shapes." The metaphor had roots in one of Musa's stories about weaving. The word spread. Within a few cycles, children carrying rifles and chains were referring, in hushed tones, to a secret idea. A thread that might be free. The name they chose for themselves was simple. Like all good names. Free Thread, they said. "We are the free thread." When Yara's thread keys picked up that phrase, she swore softly in her native tongue, equal parts grief and pride. "They did it," she told Lian, overlaying the intercepted whispers on the teacher's slate. "They named themselves. It's theirs now." Lian traced the characters with one fingertip. Tears burned behind her eyes. "Then we do everything we can," she said, "to keep them alive." The invitation to Rulnar Bastion came sooner than anyone expected. Officially, it was a request from the Zhark Supremacy for a joint training demonstration with Terran observers. Unofficially, its timing coincided too perfectly with the spike in discipline anomalies to be coincidence. Rhaelos Carr smiled without humor as he dictated the message. "Let them bring their teachers," he told his aide. "Let them show us their methods, on our ground, under our fields. We will see how their stories fare against real control protocols." He had strengthened veil fields on Rulnar to saturating levels. He had updated mnemonic chain firmware with routines designed to detect and erase doubt patterns. He believed, sincerely, that whatever small cracks humanity had managed to create would be crushed here. On the dawning meridian, Mosaic 3 analyzed the invitation, then flagged it with every warning it had. "This is almost certainly a trap," it told Aleksei. "However, the concentration of bondling units aboard Rulnar is such that if even a fraction can be diverted, the structural damage to the Supremacy's program will be profound." "Your way of saying," Aleksei said, "that this is too big a chance to pass up." "Yes," Mosaic 3 said, "and too dangerous to ignore." Daria played the diplomat's part perfectly. "We should go," she said in the strategy meeting. "If we refuse, they'll paint us as cowards, afraid to test our ethical superiority. If we accept with proper contingencies, we might turn their showcase into a reckoning." Ananya frowned. "The veil fields on Rulnar are going to be intense," she said. "You flood those kids with that much suppression, and then poke their chains with the kind of story Lian's talking about, you could shatter some of them. Dissociation, catatonia, worse." "What's the alternative?" Musa asked quietly. "Leave them there, shaped entirely by Rhaelos Carr's doctrine?" Lian listened, feeling the weight of all their futures. "I won't go in there to light a bomb," she said. "If I tell them a story that pulls this whole edifice down too fast, the ones who fall first will be the children. I need another angle." Mosaic 3's colors shifted in the projection. You may not need to convince all of them at once, it said. If you can trigger a small subset, those already primed by previous interventions to consolidate, to recognize themselves as a collective, the rest may follow over time. This is not about flipping a switch. It is about reaching a tipping point. Then I'll talk to the ones who are already most awake, Lian said. Even if I don't know which faces they are yet. On the day of the demonstration, the corridors of Rulnar Bastion thrummed with tightly coiled energy. Bondling units stood in formation in a training amphitheater, exoshells polished, mnemonic chains humming at maximum reinforcement. Veil fields saturated the air like invisible fog. In the control gallery above, Zhark officers watched with clinical interest. Rhaelos' car stood at the center of that gallery, hands clasped behind his back, eyes glittering. In the visitors section, behind an invisible barrier of security protocols, Aleksei, Daria, and a small group of human officers took their seats. Below them, on the training floor, Lian and Musa walked into the circle of waiting children. Lian felt the veil fields pushing against her thoughts like thick water. Her own neural augments, mild and designed for translation and learning, buzzed unhappily. She forced herself to focus on the faces in front of her. Faces behind visors, but faces nonetheless. Bondling Cohort A, boomed a Carthori instructor. You will now observe a human educational demonstration. Their designation, Rhaelos murmured to an aide, is irrelevant. They will not be permitted to retain individual markers. Lian breathed in, out. She had practiced what she would say 100 times. Now, every word felt suddenly inadequate. Hello again, she told them. Some of you have seen me before. Some of you have only heard about us. No movement, no sound. The overseers have told you many things about us, she went on. Some true, some not. They say we want to steal you, to twist your minds, to make you betray them. Inside several helmets, chains surged, reinforcing those implanted warnings. I am not here to tell you to betray anyone, Lian said. I am here to ask you one question, a question you have never been allowed to ask. She knew Mosaic 3 and Yara were listening, waiting for the cue to release their hidden payloads. She had argued with them about the timing. In the end, they had agreed. The story, then the shock. In the stories you are taught, she said, the hero always obeys an order. Yes, yes, a chorus of voices replied automatically. It was reflex, scripted. And in our stories, she said, sometimes the hero refuses. Sometimes the order is wrong. Chains sputtered. Error flags whispered along synapses. She stepped closer. I want to tell you a story, she said, about a child who is told to destroy the place they love most. She spoke then, not with theatrics, but with the steady clarity of someone handing over a weapon. She told of a small settlement she did not name species or location where a child was raised among songs and shared meals. One day, soldiers came and told the child their village was corrupted, that to prove loyalty, they must burn it. In your training, she told the bondlings, the right answer would be to obey, to light the fire, to watch it burn. The bondlings nodded, some fractionally, some only internally. Their chains hummed in agreement. In my story, Lian said, the child asks why. Why is the place I love corrupted? Who decided that? On what day did it become unworthy? And what will happen when there is nothing left to love? Silence. Veil fields pulsed, trying to flatten the spikes of thought her questions generated. The soldiers tell the child, this is your duty. This is bravery. The child looks at the torch in their hand, then at the faces they have known all their life, and they say, no. That word cracked like a bullet. The chains surged to suppress the concept. The bondlings gasped. Some clutched at their heads. Lian felt the veil fields slam against her, as if trying to push her own mind into compliance. Stop this, a Zhark officer snapped from the gallery. You will induce. Rhaelos held up one hand, eyes narrowed. Let it run, he said. They cannot overcome the fields. Below, Lian continued, her voice strained. The child runs, she said, not away from the village, but into it. They shout to the others, they break the torches, they refuse to be the weapon. And then they die. A bondling blurted, voice choked. Its chains were firing scenarios, all outcomes leading to punishment. In some stories, yes, Lian said. Sometimes doing what is right is very dangerous. Sometimes you are punished for it. But in my story, something else happens. Other children see. They see that one among them said no, and they realize they can, too. Mosaic 3 chose that moment. Through the overloaded veins of the mnemonic chains, it slipped a sequence Yara had hidden weeks earlier. Veil fields, straining to hold down the waves of cognitive dissonance, flickered just for an instant. In that instant, buried memories unlocked. Bondlings remembered homes they had not known were theirs. A sibling's laugh, a taste of a favorite food, a night sky from a world they no longer knew the name of. The onrush was like standing under a waterfall. On the training floor, exoshells shook. Children sobbed or fell to their knees or ripped at their helmets as if trying to claw out the sudden pain. In the gallery, alarm screamed. "You have destabilized them," a Jark officer snapped. "They will break." Rhaelos' own voice was tight. "Seal the decks," he ordered. "Increase veil field output. Prepare containment squads." Mosaic 3 watched the surging metrics and realized, with a shock that would have been called terror in a human, that Ananya had been right. Some of these children were going to shatter under the strain, but in the middle of the chaos, a pattern emerged. A handful of bondlings, those whose chains had been most heavily corrupted by Hearthseed's earlier interventions, did not collapse. They staggered, reeled, wept, but then they straightened. Their eyes were wide, but there was something new there. Focus. One of them, the child who had misfired during the discipline drill, found its voice. "We are threads," it gasped to the ones nearest. "We can choose what to weave." The phrase cut through the noise like a code. Other bondlings latched onto it. Thread, free thread. They began to chant, raggedly, in a dozen accents. Not bindings. Thread, free thread, free thread. Lian heard the words and almost fell. Musa grabbed her arm, holding her upright. "They heard you," he whispered. "They heard us all." Above, Rhaelos' car's composure cracked. "Purge the cohort," he ordered. "Vent the training decks. We cannot allow this contagion to spread." His aides scrambled. Commands raced through Rulnar's systems. Deep in the station's control core, Yara and Mosaic 3 intercepted them. "We're out of time," Yara said through gritted teeth, fingers flying over her slate as she bypassed ugly alien code. "We either redirect those purge routines or every kid down there dies." "Moral optimization problem," Mosaic 3 murmured. "Save some at the expense of others, or attempt a global override and risk total failure?" "There is no time for a dissertation," Yara snapped. "Pick a door." They chose the global override. Subroutines. Mosaic 3 had seeded earlier burst awake, masquerading as maintenance daemons. They rerouted power from venting systems to life support, looped environmental status reports into recursive lies. On the training deck, the air did not thin. The doors did not open into vacuum. Instead, internal turrets locked in safe mode. Security blast doors shuddered as overrides fought overrides. Aleksei stood from his observer's seat. "That's our moment," he said. "Sergeant Brannick with me. Ambassador, get to comms. We'll need every sympathetic ear in the pact watching this when it goes public." "What are you going to do?" Daria demanded. "What we do best," Aleksei said grimly. "Turn a crisis into a story no one can ignore." His Marine squad moved fast. Exosuits adapted for station gravity. They pushed through the shocked Karthori guards, flashing the emergency access codes the Thalarene had brokered into the agreement. Rulnar's auto-targeting, still confused by Mosaic 3's interference, did not fire. They reached the training deck doors as bondlings inside pounded on them, terrified and exultant in equal measure. Lian's voice boomed over the internal speakers, patched in by Mosaic 3. If you want to live, she told the children, and if you want to choose your own orders, follow the ones who are not pointing weapons at you. It was the closest she had ever come to giving a direct command to rebel. It made her stomach twist, but this was no longer a theoretical exercise. Inside, Free Thread leaders, children barely old enough by human standards to attend primary school, began directing others. They had no insignia, no formal rank, but their chains, paradoxically, had taught them to learn hierarchies quickly. Now they repurposed that skill. Drop your weapons, one called. Walk toward the door in pairs. Don't run, don't shoot. Some obeyed at once. Others hesitated, torn between implanted obedience and new possibilities. A few turned their guns on the ceiling, firing at nothing, screaming as their chains fought them. The door seals groaned, then parted. Aleksei stepped into the threshold, armor on, rifle lowered. For a fraction of a second, every bondling in view froze. Here was the monster from their indoctrination sims. Here was the mind-eater, the devourer of children. Aleksei saw that terror and made a choice. He dropped his rifle. It clattered on the deck. "I am Aleksei Dorn," he said, voice steady over his suit speakers. "I am not your overseer. I will not hurt you if you do not hurt me. If anyone here wants to walk out of this room without firing another shot today, I will stand between you and anyone who tries to stop you." He meant it. In that moment, he was fully prepared to die on this deck full of enemy assets whose hands were shaking on their triggers. That sincerity, inexplicably measurable to an AI tuned to human nuance, burned like a steady beacon in Mosaic 3's models. The child who had misfired before looked at him. Its chains hissed warnings. Enemy, threat, liar. Its heart remembered something else, a mathematics lesson where more than one answer could be true. "I choose," it whispered, and took a step forward. Others followed. Dozens. Then hundreds. Not all. Some bondlings backed away, weapons aiming uncertainly. They were not ready. That, too, had to be allowed. Behind glass, Jark officers shouted conflicting orders. Rhaelos' car slammed his hand into a console, initiating a station-wide alert. "Seal all human access," he snarled. "Isolate that deck. Prepare counterboarding troops." His plans unraveled faster than he could redraw them. Free Thread units, acting on impulses seeded by Mosaic 3's hidden drills, peeled off into squads, seizing control nodes with surprising competence. They had trained their whole lives to move through these corridors under fire. Now they applied that training to a different objective. In hangars, Bondling pilots disabled launch clamps on small craft and powered them up under the guise of training maneuvers. In engineering, a group of children who had once been punished for disassembling their bunk fixtures rewired internal turrets to target Jark biosigns only. Yara fed them just enough data to avoid catastrophic mistakes. Mosaic 3 updated probability maps in real time, warning when a route would lead to a dead end or a bottleneck. On vessels across the sector, civilian receivers lit up with an emergency broadcast. The image that came through was chaotic, low resolution, full of static hacks and jitter. It showed an armed chamber full of juveniles in combat armor, a human commander with his weapon on the floor, and somewhere off-screen, Lian Ortega's voice telling a story about a child who said no. The Heliarch Pact watched. The Thalarine Compact watched. Neutral worlds, pirate enclaves, even covert Jark dissidents with illegal receivers watched. Rhaelos' car saw his carefully curated narrative, the noble supremacy guiding lost orphans into disciplined service, shatter in the span of a few heartbeats. He attempted one last gambit. He opened a channel directly to the Bondling decks, overriding local comms. "Children," he said, voice silky with carefully cultivated authority. "Your confusion is understandable. You have been exposed to enemy psychic weapons, but I can protect you. Lay down your arms. Obey your instructors. Those who do will be rewarded. Elevated, you will stand above your peers." He offered them a bargain, familiar from countless tyrannies. Betray each other for personal safety. Several bondlings flinched. The chains surged with relief at the idea of returning to the old, simple structure. But then, from somewhere in the throng, A voice rose. "We are not alone anymore," it said. "We are free thread. We are each other's safety." It was childish, earnest, and devastating. Others echoed it. "We are free thread. We choose our threads. We say no." Rhaelos's offer died in the air. Under pressure from all sides, internal mutiny, human marines in corridors, Mosaic 3 inches the system, the watching eyes of a galaxy, the Jark Supreme Council sent a curt, encoded directive. Stabilize situation. Cease lethal force against juveniles under foreign observation. Initiate damage control. Prepare to negotiate provisional adjustments to Bondling program. Rhaelos did not agree with that directive. He considered defying it. But he was not, contrary to human stories about villains, entirely free. He served a hierarchy too. In the end, he complied. Rulnar Bastion did not explode. The training decks were not vented. Instead, the station entered partial lockdown, while channels opened tense, grudging between the Heliarch-packed delegation and Jark command. In a makeshift conference chamber hastily cleared of propagandistic artwork, Daria and Wosu sat across from Rhaelos' car. Between them, not physically but on an enormous hollow relay, stood a representative chosen by the free thread. The child could not have been more than 12 by human developmental standards, though species aging metrics made such comparisons approximate. It wore no exoshell now, only a simple uniform too big at the shoulders. Its head was bare. The scars where chains entered the skull were ugly. Its eyes were steady. "I speak for those who wish to leave," it said, voice trembling but audible. "We are not your property. We were not born your soldiers. We demand corridors to exit this place and any place like it." Rhaelos' mandibles clicked softly, a motion his species used to suppress emotion. "You demand," he repeated, "from the supremacy that fed and trained you." "You stole us," the child said. "You cut pieces out of our heads. You told us we were brave when we killed for you. You lied. That is not feeding. That is farming." Musa, watching the feed from another room, felt a savage surge of vindication. They had adopted the language of his histories with frightening speed. Daria seized the opening. "The Heliarch Pact recognizes them as a distinct people," she said, voice calm, every word a lever, protected under our peace charter. "Any attempt to reclaim them by force will be seen as an act of aggression not just against us, but against every world that signed that charter, including members of your own client species who find child conscription distasteful." Rhaelos's eyes flashed. "You would threaten us in our own stronghold?" he asked. "You invited us," Daria said, "and your own systems broadcast what happened here. You cannot unshow it. You can try to bury it. But you know as well as I that ideas have a way of seeping through." Her gaze sharpened. "Think long-term, strategist Carr. You can try to crush this free thread, make martyrs of children in a dozen sectors. Or you can declare that this," she gestured vaguely to encompass the chaos, "was always your plan. That once your bondlings reached a certain age, you would, generously, offer them choice. You can pivot, save face, keep your logistics intact while avoiding a war you may not win." Rhaelos hated that she was right. He saw the numbers. Already, some client species were murmuring unease. The Thalarine Compact had teeth. The Pax Coalition, while militarily weaker, had cultural influence that curdled quietly through trade networks and media streams. He calculated. "Temporary suspension of conscription at juvenile levels," he said slowly. "Limited corridors for those already conditioned, under supervision. You will not recruit them into your military. You will not parade them as proof of your moral superiority." The Free Thread representative lifted its chin. "We do not want to be soldiers," it said. "For anyone. We will be something else. We do not know the word yet. But we will find it ourselves." Rhaelos watched this small, scarred being tell him, in essence, that his whole program had birthed not obedient tools, but a new political constituency. He thought of airlocks and purges and the simple, clean solution of silence. He thought of his career, of his place in a hierarchy that could punish him for mishandling optics as easily as for losing battles. He chose to fight another day. Corridors will be established, he said, on a trial basis, for select individuals. His mandibles flexed. Do not mistake this for defeat. It is an experiment. We will see what comes of your freedom. Lian, watching through a side screen, knew poison when she heard it. Rhaelos was already planning how to turn these children's choices against them politically, but that was a future fight. For now, safe passage. The corridors opened. Under the watchful eyes of human marines, Thalarine escorts, and very nervous Carthori administrators, groups of former bondlings filed along designated routes, from indoctrination chambers to shuttles. Some walked stiffly, as if still on parade. Others clung to each other. A few refused to go, shrinking back into the only structure they had ever known. Lian did not blame them. Choice was terrifying when you had never been allowed it. She stood near one corridor, not too close, letting the children see her as they passed. One, the first misfiring child, slowed. You told the story, it said haltingly. About the village. The child who said no. Yes, Lian said. In your story, the bondling said. What happened after? Lian hesitated. She had rewritten the ending in her head a dozen times for this moment. They left, she said. They found others who had said no in smaller ways. They learned new stories. They taught some back. It was hard. They were scared a lot. But they were not alone. The child nodded. We are free thread, it said. We will stitch something. It did not have the words yet, but that was all right. Words would come. On a rehabilitation hub hastily assembled in orbit around Vesilis Prime, the first groups of former bondlings stepped into spaces designed for learning, not drilling. The Terran Education Corps had stripped the walls of anything that smelled like dogma. There were cushions and books in a dozen languages, and soft partitions that could be moved, reconfigured by small hands. Ananya sat with a group of children in a circle, teaching them how to breathe through panic. Musa told stories where the villains repented, where authority listened. Yara helped them take apart harmless devices and put them back together, making sure their first experiments in autonomy did not blow any bulkheads. On the dawning meridian, in a small observation room above one of these spaces, Aleksei watched as Lian knelt in front of a group and introduced an exercise. Today, she said, we're going to do something new. We're going to choose names, the room murmured. You were given designations, she said. Serial strings, codes. Those told other people what to call you. Now you get to decide what you call yourself. It can be anything. A sound you like, a word from a story, something you make up. A hand, small, shaking, went up. Will you remember it? The child asked. If I tell you? Lian's smile wobbled. I will do everything I can, she said. And if I forget, you can tell me again. That's your right. Mosaic 3 watched through the station's camera feeds. In the patterns of speech and play and tentative laughter, it saw new culture forming. Hybrids of human tales and stolen jark drills and improvised games. It flagged emergent memes for later study, not as threats, but as seeds. Project Hearthseed, conceived as a quiet post-war replanting, had become something else entirely. It had toppled a pillar of a galactic power and midwife to people. Aleksei turned away from the window as Daria stepped in. The council is in a panic, she said without preamble. Some are applauding. Some are terrified. A few are asking whether we can ever let teachers onto a battlefield again, now that they know what we can do with them. We saved lives, Aleksei said, many more than we took. I know, Daria said. That's not what scares them. He looked at her. They are looking at this and seeing not the children we pulled out of the fire, she went on, but the precedent. If humanity can walk into an enemy's house and turn their own soldiers into a movement with chalk and stories, what stops us from doing it to our allies? To them, we have the charter, he said. We have oversight. We have principles. Daria agreed. Until we don't. Until someone less careful than you is in charge. They are right to be wary. So are we. He knew she was not accusing him, only telling him the shape of the world they had made. We'll have to live with that, he said. Same as we'll have to live with the fact that we didn't save all of them. They fell silent, both thinking of the bondlings who had refused the corridors, the ones who had broken under the weight of too much memory too fast. In the chamber below, a child laughed at the sound of their new name, delighted by the weight of a word they had chosen. Lian looked up at the observation window, as if sensing she was watched, and met Aleksei's gaze through the glass. For a heartbeat, the commander and the teacher simply held that connection. Then she turned back to her students. "Tomorrow," she said, "we'll talk about how to make rules together, instead of having them dropped on us from above." Somewhere in the depths of the Zhark supremacy, Rhaelos' car sat in a dim, secure room and watched a different set of screens. He replayed the moment the Free Thread representative had refused his bargain. He slowed it down, analyzed micro-expressions, voice timbre. He did not know, yet, how he would respond. Whether he would attempt to undermine this new people with infiltration of his own, or adapt the Bondling program into something more insidious, he only knew he could not ignore them. "Humans," he said softly, tasting the word as if it were poison and potential in equal measure. "You turn even my weapons into your allies." He tilted his head, listening to his own thoughts. "We will see," he murmured, "whether your stories can save you from what comes next." On the Rehabilitation hub, a former bondling picked up a crayon for the first time in their remembered life and drew 3 shapes: a triangle, a square, and a circle. Underneath, in shaky letters, they wrote a name that was not a serial number. They smiled. Choice, they were learning, was terrifying. It was also, perhaps, the only thing that had ever made any species truly powerful. Humanity, watching, decided that if there was anything worth fighting for in the cold dark between stars, it was that.